This tale begins in a charming little flower shop in the heart of the metropolis. The shop's entrance was brimming with exquisite arrangements that were for sale, and the tranquil sight of various flower varieties was displayed. A complaining voice of a young man coming from inside the store seemed out of place. It's understandable that he was ready to give up on achieving his educational objectives after burying his face and blue hair in a book. However, being surrounded by so many books is bound to make anyone's head spin, especially if they are not particularly fond of studying. A young man's mother observed him like a hawk, recognizing that he had already begun to slack off. He failed completely at making his mother's life difficult after just a few minutes of hardly taking up a book. He stuffed his face with food. His mom made the comparison that he is nothing like Xiao Ling from Ani Wang's house, who attends additional lessons for 2 hours at noon. He's a slacker compared to that youngster. His mom wanted to reach a compromise, so if the young guy couldn't bear to go through the pages, he might as well assist in hanging the flower containers on the shop racks. His mom informed him that he should guarantee that he ties the rope securely. Whatever this duty was, it was undoubtedly better than burying his head in textbooks, especially since it has been rather windy in the city lately. The hanging plants were meant to be low maintenance, requiring only water and sunlight, but his mother insisted on periodically shifting their location. As the boy stared at the pot, he couldn't help but wish he could just be a plant. After all plants do is grow, drink water, and enjoy the sun. Despite the fact that the boy is the one using the fairly tall ladder, his mother seemed far more nervous about her plants falling than her own son. He was undoubtedly doing it incorrectly, so she decided that she would rather handle it herself. What transpired was the unnaturally lethal capacity of mothers to constantly criticize their children for being lazy and unmotivated. She insisted that even if the child turned into a plant, he would still most likely be a moron. The chaos of the flower shop caused by his mom's constant reprimands gave the young man such excruciating headaches that the city's business was a welcome diversion. He is now strolling through the streets, yawning idly and reading a book halfway through. He truly doesn't understand where his mother gets all these words from, either because she operates a plant shop or because when she gets on a roll, she talks like an automatic gun that can't be stopped at all. Or perhaps a pea shooter would have been a more accurate description. While he was preoccupied picturing his mother as a plant versus zombies figure, something catastrophic brought on by the shifting winds of the city was ready to happen. A potted plant that looked like a weird Venus flytrap was blown down by the wind and was now flying at his head with all of its tremendous force. He was too tired, bored, and indolent to pay any attention to anything going on around him, particularly anything that was transpiring too quickly for him to absorb. 1 second, the protagonist was simply going about his everyday life as a typical below-average student. The next, he was bleeding from his cranium, which stained the street's pavement, blending in with the nearby plants, as well as the cracked pot on their way to work, school, or wherever else. Witnesses could not anticipate seeing something this violent. A student had just been struck by a flower pot, and the blood all over the pavement was a horrifying sight that left the young guy with a racing heart. He vaguely envisioned a gorgeous dinner, complete with all the fixings: meat, vegetables, and dessert. He recalled that he had shared it with his parents. He even complimented the latter on her consistently delicious cooking. The young man eagerly sampled the rice, as is customary in meal preparations. He then stated that the white rice tasted unusual, however. When he clicked out of his dream, his parents were nowhere to be found, and what had supplemented the delicious full-course meal appeared to be layers of filthy dirt. At this point, he's aware that his mind might be deceiving him. When he awoke, he was in a weird environment that he was unable to fully comprehend or describe. It was dark, and there was an oddly nice smell. Moreover, he felt as though his arms and legs were bound. Additionally, the smell was oddly pleasant. He observed something green on the side and under light directly above. Perhaps he should try climbing up to view the source of light a little better. Moving his body in the direction of the small amount of illumination gave him the strange sensation that he had been released and reborn into the world. He felt almost like he had broken through the earth to feel the elements, and that's precisely what happened. A tiny budding plant emerged from the ground to enjoy the close-knit glow of the sunlight overhead. He wanted to wipe the figurative perspiration from his brows. but he encountered no eyebrows. However, it felt good to ultimately climb out of that darkness. Now that he was beginning to think about it, he realized that there was something rather strange about the scenario. He knew he wanted to move an arm to touch his face, but all he saw when he looked at his entire body was a bit of leaf linked to a spindly stem. It's safe to say that he appeared and felt entirely different from how he had previously appeared. In addition, he was surrounded by landscapes of mountains and mystical vegetation in the middle of nowhere. He had not anticipated any of this and was left stuck in place, unsure of what to do. The nutritious sunlight rained down onto him and other developing plants throughout the region, much like him. One thing was certain, though. He had somehow changed into a small plant. The thought seemed so absurd. Perhaps he was just hallucinating the events leading up to the incident, because his mind is still unwilling to accept that any of this was true. He recalls attending school, having lunch, and subsequently getting struck by a flower pot that fell from an outrageous height. It seemed ironic that he was whining about having to take care of his mother's dangling flower pots. He can only pray that he did not pass away in front of the afternoon crowd. That would be too embarrassing. But he is now gradually beginning to accept the possibility that he truly did reincarnate as a small rookie plant. He acknowledged that just a few hours ago, he had been whining about his studies and wishing to just become a lazy plant that lives a comfortable life. Although this could be the answer to his prayers and a terrifying possibility, the god, or whomever is in charge of this world, was being extremely genuine. And just as he was getting the dramatics out of the way, the deity took it seriously when he said some meaningless things to pass the time. Now he can only cry and plead to return to his former life and shape. He realized something that may potentially influence the course of events in this scenario. In online novels and manga, the protagonists who experience rebirths typically acquire their own systems and pursue the road of becoming powerful deities. However, if such was the case in this instance, where is his overpower system, and why didn't he hear a notification sound? He yelled and screamed for the system to appear. However, that proved futile, and all the other plants in the exact same batch stared at him weirdly. After a week of relentlessly calling for a system, he simply accepted the reality that there might not be one and that he might just be an ordinary plant, doomed to live an ordinary life. The good news is that he is not a piece of grass. The bad news is that he was once a strapping young man who was reborn as an odd-looking flower. Thankfully, he generated in an appealing piece of black soil rich in nutrients and pleasant fragrances. And a bizarrely good taste. He feels that he can thrive well in this environment. The bad thing is that it's somewhat congested here, similar to the gifted class he was in the past where everyone is trying to get ahead. Today was the day that someone was in development. The sunlight had disappeared. The skies were clear, and the problem was that the flowers that had been growing next to him had left him in the dirt. The flowers had grown to the point where they were embracing the sky and covering the land. For some reason, this repeatedly reminded him of the scenario from back in his school, where everyone was eager to make an impression. This time, he won't allow these show-offs steal his sunlight since it's simply unfair, and all of them are plants that should just be relaxing. He was going to force his way through, instead of allowing these flowers disturb his time spent sunbathing. When he eventually forced his way through with considerable effort, he opened his eyes to the brilliant world that he had come to adore in the previous week. Now that he could finally see and feel the sunlight on his skin, the petals, leaves, and each component of his plant life, his mood was instantly raised. Today was a day of odd events. As he emerged above everyone to enjoy the sun, he noticed an animal approaching, and as it got closer to the flower bed, this ignorant plant noticed a gorgeous alpaca going through and began calling it a wild horse because, in his previous life, his parents had been so preoccupied with business that they had never even taken him to the zoo. This would be his first encounter with a legendary animal. Subsequently, the creature did not let him down. The so-called wild horse is cute in and of itself. However, he stopped dead in his tracks when he realized that these creatures consumed grass. He imagined that there was a world in which the four-legged beast was approaching him and preparing to devour him. When the alpaca opened its mouth and its spit scattered everywhere, he realized that his worst nightmare might be coming true at this very moment. He instinctively attempted to hide, not wanting to die at this point, but the beast's tongue miraculously overlooked him as it began to wrap around the firmly rooted foundations. The majestic alpaca nodded casually at him, with eyes that seemed to know his destiny. Fortunately, this four-legged beast only had one bite, and it appears that he wasn't the alpaca's type of lunch. Before entirely turning and leaving him behind as the lonesome bloom in the once thriving flower bed. The creature desired to offer our unfortunate protagonist one final present. A sizzling heap of rock, hard and grey shit, left him stunned, making him wonder aloud, "What's going on?" He gazed at the mound of rich feces for a while, before shifting his focus to the nourishing soil to which his roots were attached. Sweat began to drop from his brow as he gradually realized the implications of this animal's trademark. Even though he had turned into a plant when he finally accepted the repulsive conduct, however still disgusting, he felt the world physically turning dark, like the color of the heap of trash where the vitamins and minerals of the rich black soil were coming from. It was still a little too much for him to understand that he had blossomed like a flower in horse manure. He couldn't believe he had ever imagined this same black dirt tasting soft, tasty, and exquisite. In this circumstance, it was impossible to resist puking. In the meantime, the remaining flowers that had endured a few inches from him had been blooming in bliss and happiness under the sun. Naturally, the protagonist had also blossomed. A new development in his anatomy has resulted in tooth-like structures in the center of his mouth and all the flowers surrounding him, periodically shooting him a phantom expression. They were so disgusted by our plant youngster that they failed to conceal their dislike for him. Suddenly, a huge mirror materialized in front of him, resembling a scene from one of those manga he had read. What he saw in the mirror was depressing and strange. This is how he now appears. He is turned into a big-mouthed flower. The end. Stick around for the next chapter.